started here in just a minute. Just wanted to thank everyone for coming. Our first session today is going to be titled Digital Transformation as a Catalyst for Organizational and Cultural Change. I'm joined by Jane Arnold, Chief Customer Officer at Aperio, and Audrey Van de Castle, Senior Director of Operational Excellence at Stanley Black & Decker. I'm sure a few more folks will begin trickling in. I know you guys are kind of transitioning from the keynote over here, but we'll get started and I'll kick it over to you guys.
Awesome. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. So I think we should start giving just a little bit more about our background so you understand where we're coming from. And I'll start if you don't mind. So I spent 35 years in manufacturing, starting out as a control engineer in 1989, I guess that is. And worked my way up and through a chemical plant manager, and then ended up senior vice president of our global process control technology of a mid-sized chemical global company. And then as a pandemic crisis, I decided to do something else, and I joined Stanley Black & Decker and learned all about discrete and additive manufacturing, where I met Audrey Van de Castle. So I spent my life hands-on working with operations in the units and then transforming the way they interacted with the data and the control systems. So, Audrey?
Hey everyone, my name is Audrey Van de Castle. I've been with Stanley Black & Decker for about 7 years. I actually started my journey kind of into the shop floor and manufacturing space through hands-on fabrication. So I actually have a background in welding and metalworking, and then kind of fell into making cool power tools, and then how does technology intersect with the shop floor. So my background is really in, always been in, how do we connect shop floor issues with technology, and how can technology make that a little bit better. So at Stanley Black & Decker, I lead our operational excellence technology team, which is a team full of nerds, as I like to call them, really focus on a couple different aspects of digitization in our plants, really ranging from kind of IT, OT remediation and infrastructure, pulling wires and cable, all the way to application interfaces like with Tulip, and then into the data and analytics and insights and KPIs that we can drive either on our shop floor or network level. So we've got our hands in a lot of stuff on my team, and super lucky to have Jane as a mentor and have learned a lot from her. So excited to talk to y'all today.
Great. So thanks everyone for joining us. Looks like people are coming in. Now I know everyone knows who Stanley Black & Decker is, but I was wondering if, Audrey, you could add a little more color to it, especially with the types of factories that there are and the locations around the world, things like that.
Sure, yeah. So hopefully y'all know our brand, Stanley and Black & Decker, but we also are the largest tool company in the world and the only tool company left, giant tool company left that's American owned. So we have a whole bunch of brands. DeWalt is probably a big one that's not in our actual company name that you've heard of. Craftsman, Irwin, Lennox, Porter Cable, Mac Tools, Lista, Vidmar. We got a whole bunch of brand names under the Stanley Black & Decker umbrella. And we have two main business units. One is our tools and outdoor business unit. That's the largest business unit, probably 3/4 of our business. That's where our power tools, hand tools, toolboxes are all kind of made under. And then we have a smaller business unit called Stanley Engineered Fastening. So we actually make a whole bunch of proprietary engineered fastenings for automotive and aerospace industries, things like custom clips to clip body panels onto cars, rivets for Tesla batteries, right? So we do have a smaller side of our business that's really focused on that type of fabrication. So as you can imagine, we have a very vast landscape of discrete manufacturing sites. We have about 100 facilities globally. I was talking with our quality team a couple weeks ago, and they told us we finally defined, or at least listed, all of our critical processes in our plants, and there are 18,000 of them, right? So you name a discrete manufacturing process, we probably have it, at least in one of our plants. But it does pose a very unique and interesting challenge when you're trying to standardize digital solutions for these sites, because really none of our sites are the same, especially when we think about what products our sites make. It could be anywhere from a 1-inch rivet to a 0-turn lawnmower, right? So a very different environment and landscape in our sites. We've also grown a lot over the past 20 years through mergers and acquisitions. So a lot of these sites that we're acquiring are not greenfield, they're not brand new to us. So there's a lot of kind of legacy technical debt and integration that is overdue in our sites.
Well, it sounds super fascinating. So you said your title was Operational Excellence. When you have 18,000 processes that you're dealing with and all that, I mean, how is your role really defined, or your team's role, to help with this vast, manufacturing blueprint that you have, footprint?
Yeah, so for us, our big focus right now is that foundational layer of data that our plants need to decide and drive improvements, right? I think we've seen a past at Stanley of buzzwords or maybe technology that our sites weren't ready for. Can't put an AME or an AMR out somewhere without Wi-Fi, right? So we're really kind of going after that initial foundational enabling data that we're really looking for. A lot of our plants tend to be paper-based, right? Where there's a will, there's a way in operations. I think that's one thing I really love about manufacturing, is that people get stuff done, even if it's not in the best way, right? So for us, we're really about taking, the broader OpEx team has a lot of standards and standards around lean practices that they're trying to help the sites implement. And so for my team, it's really, how do we take these lean standards like a 5S audit and make it digital so that our sites can adopt it easier, and so that we can have a better picture of what's happening in our plants, right? So our focus is really around, number one, the IT/OT infrastructure in our sites. A lot of our sites don't have OT yet, right? So putting OT in our plants and connecting our assets to that network, that's one big tranche of work that my team's focused on. And the other is these kind of foundational core applications, production monitoring, quality monitoring, tier boards, accountability boards, to really help change that culture, because we haven't necessarily had the most consistently data-driven culture in our plants, just because the infrastructure and ability for that hasn't been there, right? So how do we get those site leaders, the site supervisors, third shift, aware of what is happening on the plant floor so they can fix it as it's happening, instead of finding out a week later that maybe they missed their target or that this asset was down, right? How do we give them more real-time data is really where we're focused right now.
Oh, that's great. So when I was there at Stanley a couple years ago, there wasn't much data to be had. It was really still in the infancy stages, and it sounds like there's a lot of progress there. And at the time, we were looking at a bottoms-up approach. We were really going to operations saying, what's your pain point? Let's fix it. How do you see that evolving over time, and how has that changed, if it has?
Yeah, I think that we're lucky at Stanley to have a big enough network that we can kind of have both a tops-down and a bottoms-up approach, right? So my team is a central COE team, but we also enable citizen development in our sites, right? So there's a couple of the citizen developers here from SBD today who, without the support really of my team, right, will help you with some of the IT stuff, will help you get into the platform, but you guys know your operations better than me, right? So go for it. If you're gonna digitize something, here's our templates, go for it, right? So we kind of enable this concept of citizen development and letting sites kind of own their own destiny. Our sites, because they had been poorly infrastructured, right, had to kind of be innovative, right? I like the term, innovate within the pasture, right? Like, come on to my platform and you can do things within it, right? But at least that way I've got your data. So we're very bottoms up in that way. But then we're also lucky enough to have leadership in our supply chain, all the way to the top of our supply chain, who is really focused on a true transformation journey right now for our manufacturing facilities and the supply chain as a whole. So there's a really top-down accountability where I report out every month to the head of our supply chain on my team's progress, right? He's looking at KPIs. My team not only has KPIs that he's looking at, but we're helping our sites get the KPIs that he's looking at in the sites, right? So for us, it's really about that tops-down support and saying digital is important, and it's important because it lets us see what's happening in our plants, and we can track things and we can compare apples to apples, which we hadn't really been able to do in an accurate way before. But then also, how do we allow our sites to still be innovative and build solutions that they need? Because you might be the only site that has this weird rivet heat treat process. I'm not gonna build a solution for that, but I'll give you tools and a platform to build a solution for it yourself. And by the way, let me get that data once you have it, right? So we do have a pretty data-rich environment, somewhat still siloed, but I think I always joke, every plant I go into, I find at least one Access database that they're still using. So I'm on a quest to eliminate Access databases from our plant floor. But so I think we have this really interesting hybrid approach of bottoms up and tops down that we're lucky enough because we have the scale we have that it kind of works for us.
So in your head of supply chain, and I'm assuming that he goes out and he is vocal about supporting your team. When I was at Covestra, the CEO used to have a saying, what can be done digitally will be done digital. And so there was this known culture at the top that we will make progress in digital transformation. And I see that same thing happening at Stanley Black & Decker. How many sites do you interact with currently with your transformation?
So we probably have maybe 40 or 50 of our sites using Tulip in some way, shape, or form. Maybe a dozen, 24 of them are really deeply using Tulip, right? And then my team right now is piloting what we call our Digital Excellence Initiative in 2 sites, both here in North America, one in Mexico and one in Tennessee, where we're really trying to find some of these standard solutions, refine them to the point that we can super quickly scale them, either through hands-on support from my team next year or a self-service option, right? So that's what a platform like Tulip enables us to do. Is it's not that hard to use if we can build it for you and give you instructions for how to implement it. So that's part of our plan for scale next year with some of these standardized solutions is if it's hard, you don't have the resources in your site, my team will come in and help you. Otherwise, y'all are probably capable. You got some industrious manufacturing engineers or quality engineers who can actually implement some of these tools on their own.
Okay. It sounds like you're actually getting pull from the sites now at this point.
Absolutely.
I remember in the beginning it wasn't quite such an easy thing.
You know, and I think the game changer for that for us has been coupling our work with standards, right? I think that we come from a space where we're like, corporate standards, rules, we don't want to deal with it, right? But for us to have, our supply chain leaders say, every site has to do tier meetings and you have to talk about these KPIs and you have to calculate the KPIs this way. A lot of our plants have been like, well, we were just printing paper out and sticking it on a board when we knew the boss was coming around and we kept it moving, right? So for us now, we have this expectation set from the top, and that really goes back to that kind of tops down expectation and accountability setting. But where my team comes into play is we've got a digital tier board system. We've got a digital accountability board, right? So it makes it really easy for sites who want to be innovative and digital to do that in a standardized way that also checks the box on some of these other KPIs that they need to already collect anyway and that people are going to be looking at. So that has been a really big unlock for us by really aligning our work. Instead of just finding a pain point in a site and saying, we can build a Tulip app for that, it's kind of this rising tide lifts all ships, right? Let's get everybody to this basic level where we're all looking at the same KPIs, all talking about them at the same time, and all taking action on them to really build that trust and accountability in the shop floor. I think that digital tools, when it boils down to it, is easy. It's the culture change that's hard, right? I can give you digital tools all day, but if you don't have the culture in your site to be accountable and to do something about it, it's not going to work, right? So I think that's a really big reset that we're doing right now culturally in our sites is how do we just get everybody behaving and culturally the way that we want them to do, and how do we enable that digitally?
So I'm really curious as to how you've gotten to this point, because it's really fascinating. When I first started at Stanley, I came from a German company which was very strong on standards. Everything had a standard. There was a rule for everything. And then I joined Stanley, and I was kind of expecting something similar, and it was a little bit more free-flowing than that. And it sounds like you're able to use standards and KPIs to raise the basic level of digital understanding with your sites. Now, are they also communicating, is the culture across sites improving because of this change and they're all talking the same talk and doing the similar things?
Definitely. I think that the standard unifier has really helped that cross-pollination between our sites, and we see that a lot, right, of the site. We have sites that make similar products, right? So we've got probably 4 or 5 sites in the United States that all make lawnmowers of some shape or form, right? If you're running out of capacity here, we got a whole press shop over here in this site that can do it, right? So now we can see capacity utilization between our sites and really make those sites more agile and insource a lot more, right? Maybe jobs that they had kind of shopped out to contractors before, now we know we've got the capacity within our network, right? So it's a big unlock for kind of sharing and also finding best practices. We've got a lot of sites that do injection molding. If we see, wow, this site can make way more, way faster, the same type of injection molded product, how do we kind of identify those best practices and help share them with across the network? Yeah, for sure.
So that's super interesting. I'm going to deviate just a little bit in the Center of Excellence and citizen developers. That can really get out of control, the whole citizen developer topic. Do you find that having the standards and everyone working together and the different cultures from the sites coming together actually help with the overcreation of an app just for a thing?
I think that standards has helped. I think that we're not entirely there yet, right? For instance, we just this week implemented custom user roles across all of our sites. The one thing that IT was not letting me die on was access control, right? So we took away the ability from even my team to be able to add users into Tulip instances, right? You got to enter an IT ticket. We got to have the audit trail, right? So there's still, there's lots of screaming from our citizen developers about that, understandably, right? But I think that slowly but surely we're building that, even though it's not always the easiest, following a standard is the right thing to do in a large company, at least, because you get economies of scale that way, right? And I always go back, there's a quote from, I think, Henry Ford, who said, quality is doing what's right when no one's watching, right? And I think that that's a thing that I think about a lot is we have to hold ourselves to that standard. And that's kind of the mindset that we're helping our sites march towards, because it can be easy to kind of slip and be lazy or let things fall to the wayside, right? But really helping that culture of accountability. I think about one of the sites that we're working in Tennessee, they didn't do tier meetings at all. We walked in there, we're like, we're gonna help you do tier meetings. They're like, what's a tier meeting, right? Which is great, also very challenging. And 3 months later, one of their supervisors came up to me and he was like, Audrey, I love tier meetings. They're awesome. And I was like, he'd been at the plant for like 40 years, right? This Southern gentleman who's just putzing away in his machine shop. And I was like, what flipped you? What made you really like it? And he was like, it's because my problems get solved and I can get help, right? And I think that those are like the basic things that we expect at work, but a lot of time in our operations, they sometimes don't happen, right? And so that cultural, like the support that he felt from his plant manager, because he knew I can talk to her every day, and if I need this PO cut, she'll cut the PO for me that same day. To him, that like changed his entire work world, right? So like these types of standards, they can seem really basic, but when we actually follow them, they are a big unlock to cultural change in our sites and accountability and trust, which I think is so foundational to a lot of the work that we do as a digital team. We want you to believe in the solutions that we're giving you, right? And so for us, those kind of standards have really helped us ensure that we're building that culture of trust and accountability in our sites, where maybe it wasn't always at least adhered to all the time.
You know, I think that's a great story, and thank you for sharing. Early in my career, I actually worked as an operator for a few months. This was after we converted everything to DCS, a distributed control system, and I had the opportunity to work with the board for a few months. And I realized that there was a lot of stuff wrong that we had done during the move from panel board to DCS, but the operators, they understand the nuance of how the process is supposed to run, and they would just work around it. And they accepted that they weren't going to have the help that they need, so they would just work around the problem. So I spent my 4 months on the board fixing everything that I installed in the first place. That wasn't quite right, but I didn't get that feedback from operations because they figured it wasn't going anywhere. And it sounds like to me you have this whole system built on feedback and continuous improvement.
Yep, exactly.
So what about across different continents? So you've spoken of North America primarily.
Sure.
What about in the other locations that Stanley operates?
Yeah, so we've got, I think we have operations on every continent except for Antarctica, although people in Antarctica do use our tools. So DeWalt power tools work in the cold of Antarctica. So we have a pretty wide manufacturing and distribution base. We have a ton of adoption in some of our largest sites in Europe. And a lot of that is citizen developer owned right now. And then we also have some small starts in Asia. Particularly, we have a tape measure plant in Thailand that has been using Tulip really extensively to track production data. And we have some machine monitoring in a lot of our plants throughout Asia. So we wind our own motors. We'll monitor some of that in Tulip, right? And really I don't want to stifle the innovation that is citizen development, but I also, where I'm looking to standardize at least right now is the back end data, right? I want to be able to see our production values. I want to be able to see these KPIs that our leadership cares about. And right now, those sites have to basically enter things manually to report up to leadership. And so that's the lever that we're going after is how do we at least standardize on the back end? At this point, if your UI is fancy and not in line with my UI, cool, as long as the data matches on the back end, you guys are collecting what we need. So that's kind of the work that we're doing on, I won't call them rogue deployments, but deployments not fully owned by my team is how can we get at least their data aligned so that we can roll things up into enterprise or regional views for our leadership.
That's a great approach because the user cares about the interface more than anything else.
Yeah.
And so however it works in the background or the back end, they're probably supporters of that as long as they have what they want to see on the front.
Yeah.
So do you feel like that with this you're able to share success and failures, even with language barriers and time zone change barriers and things like that?
I think so, and I think a really good example of that would be there's a couple use cases that we've actually identified through citizen development at SBD. So, for example, we had a plant in our Czech Republic that made their quality manager made this awesome SPC app for quality control, right? A bunch of statistical graphs and connected into digital calipers. And we started on our COE team getting requests for a similar solution, right? And so we were like, hey, this citizen developer has already built an SPC solution. We took his, polished it up a little bit, added a couple more features, integrated it with a couple other systems. And now that's a standardized product that a lot of our sites use, right? So we're able to kind of see the innovation that our plants are coming up with because they know their pain points better than I ever could, and take those and share those with other sites because a lot of times those sites have similar pain points. So definitely some successes there, maybe some failures too, right? I think we where we have opportunity is always in the compliance space, right? I like to say when we first started with Tulip, it was like no rules, no governance. We let the smoke right out of the bottle, right? If I could go back, or if anyone's just starting their Tulip journey, like take a couple months just to set some rules in place, some guardrails, and that we've been working for like the past 2 years to really get IT on board with us and supportive of us. And I think we've done that, but it's taken a lot of work, and I think that would have been an easier path to walk if we had kind of set some of those rules to begin with. So I think that maybe would be a kind of a failure that we've experienced is we got to reel it in sometimes, right? Maybe you shouldn't be recording like pictures of people's faces or something like that. Not saying that's what we do, but I'm saying we've stopped things like that from happening. Yeah.
Well, I think we could spend hours talking about all the different things that you're doing at Stanley and all the things that you've learned. But is there anything that you'd like to highlight and share? One of these things that you've learned is like a best practice?
I think for us, I think it really is around some of that standardization, right? Letting sites be innovative in a way that makes them feel empowered, but also a way that makes the powers that be not scared, right? That people are going to go rogue, I think is an important lesson learned. And also I think you have to pay attention to the culture, right? So I think where I see a lot of digitization or digital transformation efforts fail is they're like, but here's this cool shiny toy. And people that in the plants, they don't care. They're like, I need to make 40 widgets in the next 30 minutes. This toy doesn't help me with that. Go away, right? So if you don't actually think about the change management and the cultural aspect, you're gonna fail, right? And I would actually be curious, Jane, from your perspective, being in this industry for so long, have you seen some of those, like what are some of the really powerful cultural drivers or changes that you've seen that come along with technology that maybe you can impart wisdom on us with?
Well, thank you. So I've always, ever since I worked as an operator, I took the bottoms-up approach. Even if I was a senior vice president and I had a team of like 500 people around the world, I still had everyone go in the control room with your application and get real feedback and incorporate that feedback into your solution, because then they buy into it and they become part owners. And I think that was the biggest shift for me, was actually really sitting with operations and learning what are your pain points and getting their input into the improvements that we made. And that was really impactful throughout my career.
I love that, Jane, because I think one of the things that I've seen a lot with the developers on my team, right? You have to go out on the floor and see people use your application, right?
Right.
Because you immediately see the pain points. And we actually implemented a feedback button in all of our standard applications. So operators on the floor can hit feedback, sends my group email the feedback directly. We get multiple a day, tons of great ideas for our backlog, right? But also, I think with a platform like Tulip, you can change things so quickly that also really gets the buy-in from the plant floor, right? I'm gonna go out here, I'm making you guys use this application. I know you feel like big brothers here, automation, all that stuff, right? But I'm working with you, I'm hearing your feedback, I'm hearing your pain point with this solution. I'll just change it right now, boom, try that. And then they feel bought in and they feel like they've got some skin in the game and they feel like it's their solution as well, I think is a really good tool. Getting out there, going to the Gemba, seeing what people are actually doing with your solutions. If you're not doing that, you're doing it wrong.
That's great, thank you. I do have a bonus question, but I'm going to hold off on that just for a second. I wanted to see if anyone in the audience has a question for Audrey about digital transformation and the cultural aspect. I think we have someone with a microphone here on the back there.
Well, so you talked about operator-centric view, and I'm in charge of continuous improvement where I work, and the problem we're really having, we're a machine shop. So getting machinists to buy into continuous improvement or digital transformations, they're like you said, I have to make 20 widgets right now. I don't care.
Yeah.
So my strategy is always to try and find what bothers them most about their job and change that. But a lot of machinists are like, well, I've been doing this 20 years. It doesn't really bother me anymore. Like, how do you coax out of people what really annoys them, what to fix for them, so suddenly they're your evangelist on the shop floor?
Sure. So this is a great question. There's another platform that we use that's like a video-based work instruction platform. And so I get a lot of pushback from SMEs or experts on the plant floor, especially from older generations. They're like, get out of here with that technology stuff, right? And I think one of the big ones that's worked for me is when you're a SME in a plant, you're on call 24/7 if it's a plant that runs 3 shifts, right? So where I hit them in the fields, when you're eating dinner at home, 8 p.m., and you get that call, wouldn't it be nice to not have to get that call, right? Let's document it, or let's instrument it in a way that people don't have to call you and rely on you, or so that people, once you retire, can go back and see your expertise and it lives on, right? So go after some of those types of pain points, like when they're not at work and they get bothered. Or another thing in some of the machine shops that we've worked in is around like people don't get material or people's machines are broken for a super long time, right? Having data is a lot more convincing to a plant manager who needs to spend money to fix equipment or to hire another material solutioner, right? Take that, you can explain to them, hey, you can, after you guys use this for a month, the data is going to be obvious where the bottleneck is or where the issue is. That's going to help you, right? So really finding, it sounds like you're already doing some of that, like what is your actual pain point? And not spinning your solutions, but just sharing with them how your solution can help with that, right? We have a slide deck that my team uses called Why Digital Excellence, right? And it has sections in it for the operator, for the supervisor, for the plant manager, for the quality manager, right? Because there's stories, there's a why story for all those people. And a lot of times it's different, sometimes similar, but different, right? The story you tell to a plant manager about why I'm going to come in and digitize stuff, very different than the operator, but still valid in both scenarios, right? So having that kind of right talk track is important. Jane, anything from your perspective as to how to get some of the buy-in from the grumps?
So, the same kind of thing. So, but sitting in the control room. So, granted, my background is different, 30 years in chemicals. But sitting in the control room and convincing them, just let's try it. Let me try it. And then when we go from they're doing everything in manual, where all of a sudden, if I get a call in the middle of the night, it's because the control's no longer working. I'm like, all right, then I convince them. But it was that sitting there and working with them and that continuous feedback and getting their input and making that happen.
We've also done some interesting studies on quantifying the amount of manual input that people have to do, right? And sometimes it's pretty mind-boggling if you like add up all the shifts and all the operators on a shift that have to go write stuff down. It's a lot. It's a lot of time there, right? And if you put that in front of people and they really, like you spend 14 hours a week recording stuff. Wouldn't you like that to like clean your space or make sure your tools are sharp instead, right? So sometimes that quantification of non-value added work can be helpful for them.
Yes. Any other questions?
You mentioned citizen development and some standards and tools that you provide. Can you maybe expand a little bit more? What type of tools and processes do you provide? And then maybe a secondary question is, how do you prevent like rogue technology and applications popping up at sites?
I'm gonna answer the second one first. We can't, right? The way that our procurement systems are set up, right? There's still, we can't wrap our control arms around everything yet, right? But what I can do is, so for example, my team centrally funds our solutions, right? A lot easier for a plant manager to swallow that pill when I tell you, hey, my team's gonna come in and digitize stuff, and by the way, you don't have to pay for it, right? So that's a lever that we use. But also having support at the top, we're starting to get there. It's taken literally years to build in our leadership. When they go to a plant, they'll say, why aren't you using Tulip for this, right? So we actually have that leadership buy-in and awareness to help kind of squash some of those rogue things. But quite frankly, we don't stop it right now, right? Those are some of the ways we're attacking it. Your first question was around standards and tools. So there's a couple standards, like core foundational standards, like I mentioned, around production monitoring, whether that's automated through machine data and then operator contextualized, or a manual like hour by hour or sick board short interval control application. So really basic. Every plant needs to be tracking their production. We already have apps that can do that are plug and play. Quality, right? So we work really closely with our quality department. They have a QMS, but it doesn't do stuff like finished stock audits, SPC, or even really tracking scrap and rework on like a shift level. They might get like a weekly scrap report, but not like a really granular thing that's helpful for continuous improvement. So we have some solutions around quality. We have tier board standards, so tiers 1, 2, 3, 4. We have standards built in. A little input app, if sites don't have connected data, they can just enter their values there. And then we've got a historical record instead of just printed stuff or an Excel file. We have an accountability board application, right? So an action tracker or an action rail if you're a CI person. We have a 5S audit application as well. So lets sites take pictures and show before and after pictures, and then also rolls up kind of a 5S score regionally, plant level, department level for our sites. And we also have a continuous improvement ideas application that's standardized so that we can get ideas from our operators on the plant floor. I think I hit on all of our super standard apps, but those are really the standards. The other things that will help our sites with and have started to standardize is, number one, getting help from IT. I don't know if I'm alone in that in our company, but I feel like not. It's usually a pain point when I talk to folks, right? We know how to make IT, I won't say do their job because this is being recorded, but we know how to make IT actually get on board to help our sites with their real pain points. And we actually have built partners in IT that are willing to do that, which is really transformational for our sites. We also do a lot of work. We have standard UI templates that people can use if they'd like to. And we have data pipelines. So we have a data lake. We use Snowflake at SBD. And so we've standardized connections to our data lake. We've standardized a connection to our largest instance of SAP, but also now that we've connected into our data lake, all of our ERP data is in there. Most of it is at this point. So we can help our sites kind of grab ERP data through our data lake. If they don't have that skill set, we've already kind of done that work for them and have that pipeline built. Yeah.
That's great. You're definitely reaching across all areas of the company. That's great. I think that we are about to finish up. Can I ask one bonus question first? Okay, so this is really just personal because I thought this was fun. But at dinner last night, we were talking about the most unusual app that you've created that has made a positive impact on your work at Stanley. And I was just something, if there's something that you could share that maybe you'd never considered before, that this would be an application for it, if you'd be willing to share that.
Our returns application. So we process, in the United States at least, all of our returns from big box stores through Tulip apps. So a very interesting use case, one that we identified early on, and not even in our own facilities, right? So they're in the return centers of places like Lowe's or Home Depot, and we're actually using Tulip for our employees that are in those centers to actually process returns. So a very interesting use case that you wouldn't normally think of.
All right. Well, we'll be around if you have any additional questions, and thank you for your active listening and participation.